party, people. This is day 14 of MovieFiles 100 movies in 100 days, and today we are doing the sequel to the hit movie Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters 2. Now, looking at this movie in sort of a indifferent perspective, because you have to, I can understand the reason why there were mixed reviews about this film. There was the entire cast and characters from the last movie were here. There was an unexplained birth of a child and issues with a abandoning father, and the Ghostbusters were pretty much in the same situation. We never got to see any progression from when the city accepted them. Instead, we went into a scenario where the group themselves were outcasts again, just like the first film, and were struggling with finances and lack of success. This did kind of bug me a little bit, but we can go more into it as we talk about the movie's story, the structure, and also the acting. But I do want to put out there that I did have fun watching this movie, and it's one of those films where I find it's a cult classic, and very timely cult classic. And in terms of the comedy, it's all there, the fun highs and the also terrible lows. It's a fun movie. But we also got to look at stuff like budget in this movie as well, because the budget seemed to have increased quite exponentially in comparison to the first movie. So let's go with the story. Ghostbusters was a 1989 supernatural comedy, as I've stated, is a sequel to the movie Ghostbusters, and was produced and directed by Ivan Reitman, and as before written by Ramis and Dan Aykroyd, and it stars the entire cast of the first movie. I'm not gonna lie here, it's the entire cast of the first movie, sans the villainous role that's kind of changed from the EPA advisor more so to the mayor's aide. And the biggest change as well is that Ernie Hudson actually got a mention as one of the lead characters in this movie, whereas the 1984 film Ghostbusters didn't have him in that sense, and I don't understand why that is. Apparently a lot of people were inferring racial issues, but I don't think it was that. I just think there was the fact that he came in sort of at a later time period in the movie itself, and also the fact that his character never really developed as much as the other guys who were developed from the get-go. After saving New York City for Gozer, the Ghostbusters attempt to bill the mayor for the full amount of their efforts. Instead, Egon, Peter, Ray and Winston were all sued for the property damage that was inflicted on Manhattan, and they also had a restraining order barring them from investigating the supernatural. I am not kidding. So that forced them out of business. Ray and Winston instead decided to actually do children's parties as the Ghostbusters, and also Ray owns his own bookstore which investigates the occult phenomenon. Egon works in a laboratory that investigates more so human emotion, so he's doing his own thing while the other Ghostbusters are doing theirs. Peter hosts his own television show where he looks at psychics and non-psychics, and actually had a fun little duologue with one of the actors in this movie, who was supposed to be a known psychic. He told them exactly what the date is from the end of the world, which basically specifies a couple of days to New Year's Eve. And Peter's like, well, you don't have to sell books then. Why are you selling books if it's going to be that late? Why are you going to sell books if it's going to only be a couple of days away? To which the guy replies, well, I'm not actually doing this to sell books, I'm doing this to warn everybody. Which is our first snag. It's like going on YouTube and telling people that the world is going to end and then put AdSense on the video. So Peter's girlfriend, Dana Barrett, is living on her own with a son from an unexplained father who has no appearance in this film whatsoever. So we don't know who this guy is. The kid hasn't been established, just the fact that she has a kid, so everyone's, thinking it's Peter's. And she ends up spending most of her time retouching up old art at the Manhattan Museum of Art, after an incident where Oscar's baby carriage is basically being taken away by unknown forces. Again, we don't get much of an explanation for this. We get an explanation that they're attracted to Oscar for some reason, but we don't know why. Dana decides to go to Egon and Ray for help, so they can explain what's going on and hopefully help her and aid her in regards to her son Oscar and why something which can't be explained is trying to take her son. Meanwhile, her colleague, Dr. Janos Pohar, is basically been taken over by Vigo. Vigo's made him his servant, so to speak. And the thing about Vigo is that he's trapped in a painting. His ghostly soul is in this painting from the fact that he wasn't only killed, he was burned, he was shot, he was beheaded. He was basically left in a pile of mulch before his head said that he will be back to assume his role as master of the world once again. So hence he's doing that now after being trapped in this painting thing. So he gets Janos to follow out his ghostly plan. Vigo orders Janos to get the child so he can possess the body in time for New Year's so he can enact his plan. Now, I'm picking this apart a little bit from a biased perspective. From myself, I love this movie, but I really have to bring about why Vigo wants this child. There's like billions of babies on this earth. Why this child? And I can specifically explain it from the fact that maybe it was due to the fact that its mother, Dana, was possessed prior by Gozer, so that there's a link between Vigo and Gozer. That would make a lot more sense. It would be easier to assume why he wants this child, because the child is special or has some sort of special abilities or is susceptible to Vigo's control. That would make more sense, and it would give a better depth to the story at the moment, because at this time they're working blindly. You know, the things aren't linking up, people aren't working together on this, and otherwise there's no reason to bring Dana Barrett back. There's no reason to have Oscar in this movie, and there's no reason for a link between Dana and Vigo to be established. I'm also saying this as someone I played the game, but I'm only like a quarter of the way through this game at the moment, so I don't know exactly if there's a link established in this game between these two movies. I have no idea, so I'm going to keep on reviewing this movie and linking it to the first one in hopes that I can establish some sort of connection, because at the moment I can see the reason why a lot of people were annoyed about this. The Ghostbusters decide to track down to First Avenue, where the baby's carriage was stopped and it was first taken over, to figure out exactly what happened. So they illegally excavate this area basically by drilling into it, pretending they're builders, trying to avoid the police and avoid contractors, just avoid anybody with their funny Manhattan accents. Well, they sounded more like they were from Boston. And you have these little funny moments where they lower Ray down while the police officer's having an argument with Peter, with Egon, in terms of what the hell's happening. And instead of trying to bring Ray up, you see this huge pile of pink goo, which is supposed to be like primordial ooze, I believe, which is working on human emotion. So it's getting stronger as the angrier people are getting, and vice versa. It's making people more angrier the stronger it gets. Attacked by the slime after obtaining a sample, Ray accidentally hits a pipeline that causes a citywide blackout. The Ghostbusters are then arrested, put on trial, and are then found guilty of investigating the supernatural. So they broke that court order that the mayor put on them, to stop them from practicing what they were supposed to be practicing in the first place, which is basically their job. And that in turn, once the judge got angry and then threw the book at them, two ghosts came out of that primordial ooze, causing a huge scene in the courthouse. And it's great where they're all hiding. The ghosts are causing so much freaking havoc. After the ghosts attack the courtroom, the judge pleads with the guys to do something about them, and they say to him, well, the only way we're going to do something about it is if we actually, Now, as we know, the Ghostbusters were represented by Louis Tully, who was in the former film, played by Rick Moranis. They literally had everybody in this movie from the original Ghostbusters cast. It wasn't a bad thing, but in the end, it's like they're struggling to try and find things for the original cast to do. Now, the judge pleads with them and pleads with Tully in order to Ghostbust and deal with these things. They have to throw out the case and also rescind on the order that the mayor put on them for their previous indiscretion. Judge says, fine, just do what you got to do. They have the order rescinded, they won the case, then they go after this ghost. And there's a great little moment here where they put the proton packs back on and they start doing a rendition of Do Re Mi, where it was like Do Re Iga. I loved it, and I think it was a nice little quim for Harold Ramis, who just came in and just he gave that sort of look to Peter as they get ready to bust this ghost.
Heat him up. Do Re. He gone.
And the ghosts are taken care of, and the Ghostbusters are then finally back in business as they're attempting to deal with this whole mess and put things right. Later, Dana's seen in this rather funny scene that looks like they just want Sigourney Weaver to take her clothes off and show her boobies, which I don't really mind too much because, you know, Sigourney Weaver, she's hot. You know, I didn't really just watch Aliens for the aliens, just saying. She's taking Oscar's nappy off, getting ready to put him for a little bath time, and instead of water going to his bath, there's slime, and it attempts to attack her and the baby. Egon later finds with his findings on the goo that the goo reacts to a very negative charge, but also reacts to positive charge as well, including the fact that he done a test on the toaster that when he played some music, the toaster started dancing.
What kind of test?
Well, we sing to it and we talk to it and say supportive, nurturing things to it.
You're not sleeping with it, are you, right? Oh, you. It's always the quiet ones. You howl.
Now, while Peter and Dana have dinner together, the boys decide to go down and investigate the tunnels where the slime came from. While they're measuring the depth of this slime, Winston gets pulled into the river and the boys go in to try and help him, and they all just basically get thrown in as well. As they come out of the underground tunnels, they're all sitting there fighting, screaming at one another, including Ray and Winston getting into a fisticuff almost. When Egon realises what's happened, he tells them to take off their overgarments, basically, because the slime's causing them all to get very angry and very negative at the same time. They then learn that the river is flowing directly under the museum, so this is where all this slime is sort of generating from. The Ghostbusters then go to the mayor and, you know, convey their findings. They let the mayor know exactly what's going on. The mayor dismisses them, and his new assistant Jack, who's trying to get him a job as a governor, then basically states to them, look, you know, tell someone exactly what's been going on, I'll give you someone, and gets them all committed.
Don't look at me. I think these people are completely nuts.
Then a spirit resembling Janos, after conveying his plan to Vigor, kidnaps the baby and then takes him away to the museum, where Dana follows. She then enters the museum and is covered by a barrier of impenetrable slime. And, you know, Janos basically talks to her about their relationship and that she's going to be his wife, and, you know, that he could be their son and they could raise him as their own, yada 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 yada. This is a fun little thing. I can understand why they did it, because she's a mother, she's desperate, she wants her boy, but they also gave her a kind of you know, aggressive approach from being the damsel in distress that she was before, and, you know, the sexualized person that she was previously. They gave her a kind of an opposite sense where, like, I'm a single mum, I'm doing it on my own, I'm very, you know, positive, sort of feminist outlook, so to speak. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but in a sense, it's like you're going into a place where you have no experience, you have no expertise, you're totally out of your element here, but you're going to go in there anyway. Now, as we'll talk about Jack for a second, the mayor's aide. This guy is literally the EPA guy all over again. He's a guy who's being used as the main antagonist. He's the main villain of this piece because he's stopping the Ghostbusters from doing their jobs. He's the one who's stopping them from doing what has to be done because he doesn't believe in what they're doing. He believes it's all fake and that they're a bunch of liars. It's pretty much the same stance that was in the first movie, so again, it reacts kind of negatively because it seems like they're portraying the same story. And it's like, okay, you've done this before, the mayor's seen what's happened before, he talked to a ghost of his dead friend before, so obviously he knows what the fuck's going on. There could be an opposite side of the opinion here, thinking, okay, he just doesn't want to seem as a crazy person if he tries to go for office, but you're the mayor of a town that's already had these guys bust ghosts before and had major incidents before. You can't just sweep that under the rug. There's got to be focal point of attention to this. So it seems that they're ignoring a lot of what happened in the first film in order to concentrate on the second film, and it's kind of repeating the same story. The mayor then puts an emergency meeting together, and again we go through the same thing where he's wondering where the Ghostbusters are. Jack says that he's had them committed because he didn't believe in them. He's trying to protect the mayor's interests. The mayor then goes on and fires Jack and gets them to get the Ghostbusters out of prison. So they get released, and they then go to the museum to take care of this thing. They can't get past the barrier of slime, so they instead decide, okay, we've got to try something different. So they remember what happened with the toaster and decide to get the Statue of Liberty all covered in that goo with a positive charge and started putting music on. I love how they use the remix of Higher and Higher. I remember as a kid watching this, and as the music was like resonating and it was pounding, I just got up and started dancing. It was brilliant. And again, seeing something as awesome and inspirational as the Statue of Liberty kind of getting people in the mood. I understand the reason why they did it. It's very American. It got them, you know, straight to where they needed to be, and they had like little touch of a Nintendo controller in there as well. I believe it was a joystick. The Statue of Liberty then breaks them through the museum. They go straight through and attack Vigo and Janos. Janos tries to basically stop them. They just cover him in goo and he's done with. They then start attacking Vigo, who earlier on attempted to possess Ray. So he kind of, Ray was sort of susceptible to being possessed. So we'll go later on into that a little bit more as we're talking about it. But he fights with them, he traps them, and then he takes the baby and tries to possess the baby. Then we hear loads of like happy people out in the back, and it causes Vigo to sort of collapse and the baby to fall, in which Peter catches him. So then Vigo returns to the painting as the Ghostbusters try to subdue him. Ray then gets possessed by Vigo after their previous altercation together and says, "I'm not Ray, I'm Vigo." They then goo him and destroy the painting, causing the painting to explode, and then for some weird reason it has the Ghostbusters on the painting. Everyone's happy. Ray and Janos are giving each other cuddles, saying that they love everybody and they love everything, whereas the Ghostbusters, you know, give each other a pat on the back that they've done amazing work. And Peter is sort of a changed man as well, ready to settle down with Dana and her little boy. Outside, the Ghostbusters receive a standing ovation by everybody from the town, and then the movie ends. It's so funny how this movie resonates pretty much the same as the first, and I think they kept to that simple structure of the story in order to maintain what the movie had before. But this movie pretty much was a studio movie. It didn't seem like a Ghostbusters movie because it seemed that it lacked a lot of input from the original characters, the original cast, and there was a huge attempt to try and keep everybody in this movie together, including Moranis, because they wanted to make sure that everyone from the previous movie was in this. And I think that kind of backfired a little bit. There's no progression in terms of the Ghostbusters characters. They started from the beginning and got to the exact very same end that they had before. You know, people not believing in what they did, thinking they were a bunch of shysters, and then going back to their development that they're not shysters. You know, he had Peter assume the same role that he did in the previous movie, where he seemed like a guy with a doctorate who was more like a used car salesman, you know, as he was referred to in the previous movie. And pretty much the same thing. He was hosting a TV show on Paranormal Activity, trying to sell people books from people that he thought were mad. There was this entire disbelief in what the Ghostbusters did when in the first movie they did it. It was there, it was done. You know, these guys stopped these big nasties, they stopped the end of the world happening, and you're telling me that they're just going to be pigeonholed and be thrown into a loop where they're out of business, where they're going to lose everything again? It doesn't make sense. In terms of the characters, everyone was pretty spot on. Ray was Ray, Egon was Egon, you know, Winston was Winston. He had a bit more of a bigger role this time around. It was more of an ensemble cast thing this time, instead of relying too much on Peter. in regards to being the lead character because he stood out more in the previous movie. It relied on each member of the Ghostbusters team. Everyone played their role. As I said before, Jack and the EPA guy, it's basically switching the roles up to fill one or the other. You know, it was the same guy pretty much, and we see it again a lot in the Ghostbusters game where the EPA guy comes back and he's got more of a prominent role this time around. In a sense, I see where people have gotten annoyed. It's a bigger budget but same film. There's no progression, there's no sequelity to it. It doesn't feel like a sequel, it just feels like a rehash. In terms of the villains, I liked Vigo. I thought Vigo really worked for the cast of characters, but in a sense as well, there needed to be an understanding of why Oscar was chosen. It's like with the painting as well, you could have said that Oscar had some supernatural ability, he had some supernatural powers from him because of the fact that his mother was who she was. There could have been an element of Gozer in this as well. They could have talked about that previously. And Moranis' character, and there could have been a speak about the relationship between Lewis and Dana, because they did have sex before they turned into those big monsters in the previous movie. He could have been his child. Hell, he could have been Peter's child. They needed to give this kid more of a solid background so we knew who Oscar was, but no one stated anything. He could have been a supernatural being. He could have been the fact that he was conceived as part of this issue with Gozer. They needed to refer back, and they needed an element of story in this that showed a continuation from the previous film. Now, saying that, was this a bad movie? Of course not. I love this movie. It's again, with Ghostbusters 1, it's one of my guilty pleasures. It's a cult favourite. But as a Ghostbusters movie itself, it didn't stand out in terms the same as the previous movie. I think if there is potential to do a third movie, they need to start looking at story and structure. And try and distancing these guys away from the same old plot devices. Big bad Ghostbusters are in doubt, the city hates them again, they need to find a way to be in favour of the city and earn money, but also stop this supernatural being, and then everyone believes in them again, yada 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 yada. If you look at stuff like the Ghostbusters cartoon, for instance, or should I say the real Ghostbusters cartoon, not that Hanna-Barbera thing, they tend to sort of get away from those plot devices. They had original stories that were being told, and I think the best way to sort of bring originality to the next movie would have Aykroyd and Ramis partner up with another set of writers to hash out a bit more meat in the scripts and give us a bit more to these characters, because in the end you want to look at the journey from A to B in terms of their story, and in terms of the story of the Ghostbusters themselves. No one's grown in this movie. It's literally taking a step back and bringing them back to where they were before, and that's pretty much it. They had cool new kits, flashier effects, and an awesome soundtrack. That's pretty much it, and that's not what a basis of what a movie makes, especially one in this type of genre of movie, and especially one that was inspired by Aykroyd's original vision. So I've got a funny feeling that it wasn't entirely Aykroyd and Ramis' fault on this. I think it was more the studio wanting to stay with the same formula, wanting to do everything that made the first movie pop. But in a sense, even though this made money, it made a lot of money, it still didn't manage to get the same success than the previous movie. And as I said, I can understand why they decided to hold off on the third movie, because of the fact that this movie didn't receive the critical acclaim that it should have. But that's usually what happens in terms of certain movies. Once a movie becomes big, studios tend to gain more control over it, and they insist on the person behind that movie using the elements that made that movie great in the sequels. We can look at the Spider-Man franchise as a prime example, which is another license that Columbia Pictures hold as it stands at the moment. And that's something that's not good. You know, in terms of what the potential Ghostbusters could be and what it hasn't become, I can see the reason why Bill Murray is kind of hesitant in reprising his character for this movie, because in a sense his story is all wrapped up. Why do they need Peter Venkman back? He doesn't need to be back. He's happy with Dana and Oscar. He's living his life. He doesn't need to be in the third movie. The only way I could see them doing this is literally taking on a story that acknowledges the other two movies and draws from them, but doesn't do the same thing that the other two did before it, you know, which is, as we said, gone from A to B. There needs to be a new status quo. Now let's go down to the rating. As you guys know, I do from a 1 and 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, and I give this movie a very tight 3. Now don't get me wrong, I love this movie, and it's a guilty pleasure that I love to watch again and again when I have the chance. I've exposed family, I've exposed loved ones, I've exposed my children to this movie. But it just doesn't seem like it's a Ghostbusters movie. It seems a reimagining of Ghostbusters 1. And in a sense, it's not a bad thing, but it's something that could have been a lot better. So a lot of people that have seen the first will probably consider this one the inferior product by. But in terms of what the movie stands for, it's always going to remain a cult classic, especially with a franchise that has grossed millions upon millions of dollars. From cartoons to toy lines to action figures, and also to the fact that it spawned 2 movies. Not bad for something that was Dan Aykroyd's baby. And it's funny how this movie still stands the test of time today. But would I recommend it to anybody that was willing to get into the franchise? I probably wouldn't. I'd recommend the first movie at first and say, well, they did do a sequel. If you want to watch the sequel, you can do. But it's pretty much the same thing as the first, but with more flashier and more effects, and had a more sort of family tone to it. And that's another thing. The swearing kind of went in this movie. They didn't have much of it. You know, it seemed a lot more toned down, and it was a huge lack of improvisation, I'd say, as well, in terms of the characters' dialogue and the way they actually represented themselves. And they should have been more comfortable this time around. Well, it only took 5 years, and you know, you could understand as well the reason why people had a hard time saying how awesome this film could have been, because of the fact it didn't try anything new with the characters. But that's pretty much it. Tell me what you think. Leave a comment at the bottom, and remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you already haven't done, and just let me know what your experiences with the film is. Tell me your most enjoyable experience with Ghostbusters, with the franchise, with the second movie, and also explain to me why you feel that my review didn't work or did work, or if you felt this movie was inferior in comparison. And remember to stay tuned for more on Bill Murray Fortnite, where I do more movie reviews, as I'll be reviewing Zombieland tomorrow, and I'll also be doing my playthrough on Twitch TV for the Ghostbusters video game. So if you want to look at the unofficial third Ghostbusters movie, come onto Twitch and check me out. See you then.